It's a real pleasure to be here. It's always great to share information with creative and thoughtful people who care deeply about the future. And I'm always excited to talk about agriculture. Some of you may know American Farmland Trust because of our iconic bumper sticker, but you may not know much else. For 40 years, we've been working on the critical issues which really will determine the future of our society and our planet. Now, our planet is in a climate crisis, and farming is one of the few hopeful solutions. Farming done right has the promise to capture and hold significant amounts of carbon. Now, those of you who are familiar with farming and agricultural policy today may be surprised to know what didn't exist in 1980 when AFT was formed. At that point in time, there were only a handful of farms that had been protected with agricultural conservation easements, which is the tool that you use to make sure that land will forever be available for farming. There was no conservation agriculture community or community of practice. There was no recognition of agricultural easements in federal law. There was no federal tax donation for providing an easement. There was no federal money at all for farmland protection, and there was only limited sporadic federal programming that supported better farming practices. In fact, the part of the Farm Bill, the conservation title that deals with better farming practices, didn't even exist. Now, having a conservation title in the Farm Bill might not sound like a big deal, but it is. The Farm Bill is easy to criticize, and I'm someone who does that all the time, but the conservation title is an exception. Since 1985, it has provided $115 billion to farmers to help them build soil health, save water, reduce runoff, and sequester carbon. Now, we haven't yet done nearly enough, but I hate to think of where agriculture would be today if those steps hadn't been taken, if that groundwork had not been laid over the last 35 years. AFT made all of this happen. Now, I can brag about AFT because I wasn't there then, but I think any objective observer would say that what AFT did was truly extraordinary. We launched the conservation agriculture movement, a broad label under which regenerative agriculture falls. It's an impressive legacy. It's advanced unprecedented federal and state policy change and has created great opportunities for innovation amongst farmers. But enough about the past. We're here to talk about the future. The challenge of our day is climate, and farming has a pivotal role to play. AFT is not alone in advancing this, but we have a longer track record and a deeper knowledge than others. And perhaps more importantly, we have a broader perspective of agriculture than many other groups. And I think on the issue of climate, that's critical, because agriculture's potential solutions go beyond just better farming practices, as essential as those are. AFT is the only national group that takes a truly holistic view to agriculture. From our earliest days, we have been about the land, about the practices that you employ on that land, and about the people who steward that land, our farmers and ranchers. But we're going to start with farming practices because that's what everyone's talking about, and for good reason. Because our soil can hold up to 3 times more carbon than our atmosphere. Now, you'll hear about regenerative agriculture, as we're talking about today, but you'll hear other terms as well. You'll hear about restorative agriculture. You'll hear about climate-smart agriculture. You'll hear about carbon farming. And these terms are not exactly the same, but there's a lot of overlap, and I don't want us to get bogged down on the nuances. The basic concept is the same, and that is to utilize farming practices that maximize environmental benefits, including building soil health and sequestering carbon. Now, what are these practices? There's a lot, but some of them are no-till or low-till, active use of cover crops, active use of crop rotations, things called alley cropping. On the livestock side, intensive rotational grazing, use of silvopasture, and I could go on and on. These practices are not new. AFT and others and many enterprising farmers have been using them for decades. That's not to say that new technology isn't playing an important role. Precision agriculture in particular is a tool that elevates these practices to new levels of efficiency. So what technology is doing is allowing us in some ways to accelerate adoption. But the biggest change is not in technology, it's really in our outlook. In the 1980s, when AFT began working on these practices, our focus was on reducing runoff and reducing erosion and building soil health in order to increase productivity and resiliency, not carbon sequestration per se. But we now know that these same practices are the most cost-effective ways of taking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it in the soil. Beyond that, we now know that we must put carbon back into the soil if we have any chance of meeting the Paris Climate Accords. The clear finding of the IPCC report that you heard about yesterday, a clear finding is that we need to go beyond reducing emissions. We need to sequester carbon. And that report was really a game changer. It's the reason why so many people and organizations are now talking about regenerative ag. Now, farming provides an extremely hopeful solution because farming gives us a chance to simultaneously grow nutritious food and help restore the planet. And that's truly hopeful. But we do need to be careful here and to avoid blind optimism. And I'll give you one example that sort of a factor that complicates the calculus here. And that's the interplay between how we farm and how much farmland we have. Though it's wonderful that farming can both grow food and provide essential environmental services, we must remember that we cannot maximize food production and environmental benefits on a single parcel. We can optimize, we can find the right balance, but we can't maximize both. If the goal is to manage the land for maximum food production, we will incur some sacrifice in environmental benefits, and vice versa. And in this way, farming practices is directly related to farmland loss. With every acre of farmland that we lose, we are not only losing land that could be used to provide greater environmental benefits through regenerative practices, but we put more pressure on the remaining land to be farmed more intensely because the amount of food demand hasn't changed, right? So it's a double hit. It's a reinforcing downward spiral. This wouldn't be such a big deal if we weren't losing farmland so fast. But in the last 20 years, we have lost 31 million acres of farmland in this country. That is the equivalent of all the farmland in Iowa. Now, some people are alarmed by this. I'm certainly in that camp. But there are a lot of intelligent people who aren't. And here are some of the things that I hear from them. I hear, well, we'd have plenty of land if we just didn't eat meat or if we just didn't use land for growing product for biofuels. I hear that, well, in the future, we're not going to need the farmland to grow food because it's all going to be grown elsewhere in vertical farms or whatever, which are very important, but not a full answer. Or I hear, well, we can significantly increase our productivity through technology. Now, I have a solid response to all of these, but I don't have time to go into it, but you can ask me later. I'm here all week. But I will touch on that last item of increased productivity. Society has seen huge increases in productivity in the last 100 years, the so-called Green Revolution. And some people think that that trend line can continue. But we must remember that increased production came at a significant cost, including the skyrocketing increase in the use of petroleum-based fertilizers. Not exactly what I'd call a climate-smart answer. Now, I have no doubt that we can increase productivity, but I question how much we can increase productivity if simultaneously we are trying to pursue regenerative practices as we must. And this is because, as noted earlier, as you intensify food production, you limit opportunities for environmental benefits. Now, don't get the wrong idea. I do think that we'll see productivity increases through technology. I also think that technology is going to augment our food supply through strategies like vertical farming. That's all good, but I doubt it will be enough to feed the future of a population, not if we are continuing to lose farmland. If we don't stop farmland loss, we would need an unrealistically high and an environmentally unsound increase in food production to outpace the demand of a growing population eating an adequate diet. So simply put, we can't risk to lose the farmland we have. In fact, let me take this argument one step further and ask this very provocative question. Do we have enough farmland today? Now, you may respond, well, of course we do. After all, in the US, we grow far more food than we need. But let's think about the farmland we would lose if, for instance, there was ample vegetation along every waterway to filter runoff and keep our rivers and streams clean. What if we utilized adequate crop rotations and cover crops everywhere? What if the marginal land that's out there that is now farmed was restored to native prairie or woodland or wetlands? What if we were serious about having farming be carbon neutral? What if we took it to the next level and had farming actually be a significant carbon sink, which is needed because we know there are some economic sectors that are never going to be carbon neutral? If we did all of those things, would we have enough farmland to provide the environmental services we need today? And wait, there's more. Because I'm only talking about the United States here. And of course, these are global issues. And they're dynamic issues, right? Because there's a growing population, and the impacts of climate change include shifting weather patterns and increased temperature and reduced rainfall in some areas and rising sea level, all of which on their own is going to take even more farmland away. So, how much farmland do we need? This is a really basic question that has gone unanswered. Not because people haven't thought about it, because it's more complicated than you may think. But AFT, I'm happy to say, is positioned to address this. It's truly the next logical step in a major project that we've been undertaking for 5 years. All we need is a few more years and a few more $1 million, and we do take checks. But even if the results of that research are a ways off, there is one thing I can tell you now with confidence, and it's this. Long before we run out of the agricultural land that we are going to need to feed us, we are going to run out of enough agricultural land to provide the environmental services that we need to restore our planet. In fact, it's quite possible we are already extremely close to this tipping point. We just don't know it. Now, my point in all this has been to show how our ability to advance regenerative farming practices is directly dependent on the amount of farmland we retain. But the connections don't stop there, right? The next critical piece involves the farmers and ranchers who work that land. And even if you retain adequate farmland, the system breaks down if we don't have enough people to work that land. Now, this is becoming a huge issue across the globe. In the US, AFT estimates that 40% of the farmland will transition in the next 15 years due simply to the age of the farmland owners. Where are we going to find these new farmers and ranchers, folks willing and able to do the work? And if we don't find them, how much of that land risks being lost to other uses, further escalating the trend in farmland loss that is already too great? Now, fortunately, our country is full of people who want to farm. They just need help, and that's why AFT provides a lot of services. And a quick important aside here. Often the only way to remove one of the critical barriers for beginning farmers is to increase the amount of land that is protected under an agricultural conservation easement, because that will lower the cost and make it affordable. It's another instance where the issues of land and people are connected. It's a system. So what does all this mean? It means that to combat climate change, we desperately need to transition to regenerative practices. But regenerative practices by themselves won't guarantee anything. We will never realize our goal unless we have sufficient farmland and sufficient number of farmers who are working that property in the right way. Yet there is realistic hope. We have, over the last 40 years, developed the tools to protect farmland, advance environmentally sound farming practices, and keep farmers on the land. We are not implementing those tools at the level we need to, but we know what to do. We just need to accelerate our work. Now, both public policy and markets have a role to play here. I've worked in the trenches of agricultural policy for over 25 years, and I believe that we are poised for transformational change. And it's because of the severity of the crisis and the fact that an increasing number of people care about farming, care about agriculture, and see the connection to climate change. And when it comes to environmental markets, and no time to go into the details, but I think we stand ready for some major breakthroughs. So government action and market forces can together provide a way to compensate farmers and ranchers, not just to grow food, but for the critical environmental services that they are providing. And ultimately, that is what is going to accelerate us towards widespread adoption of regenerative practices. Finally, I'm optimistic that AFT's next wave of research is going to make a difference. Knowing how much farmland we need, knowing where that tipping point is, can be a catalyst for change, because compelling data can drive action. I'm going to end with a very short and sweet, I hope, video that we made a year ago with the release of our first Farms Under Threat report. Now, farmland loss is not a topic that sounds optimistic, but as I noted, there are reasons to be hopeful. We have the tools. We just need to rally the resources to make it happen, and you can help with that.
The United States is blessed with some of the richest farmland and ranchland in the world. This land grows our food, supports our rural communities, and contributes $1 trillion a year to our economy. Well-managed farmland controls floods, suppresses fires, and protects our water and wildlife. And farmland provides a unique tool to combat climate change, a way to sequester carbon through natural means that improve soil health. Our future depends on having enough farmland to both feed us and to restore our planet. Yet our farmland is disappearing. We are losing it to expanding cities and suburbs and to single-family homes built on large lots in rural areas. In 20 years, we've lost 31 million acres, as much farmland as exists in the entire state of Iowa. That's twice the amount previously thought. That's 3 acres a minute, and the loss is irreversible. But there's hope. Since 1980, American Farmland Trust has led a movement of agricultural land trusts and state programs that have together saved 6.5 million acres. Clearly, much more is needed, but the tools are now in place to do more. With your help, we can save the land that sustains us. Learn more about our farms under threat and join the cause.